Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexander. I represent two organizations today, Karolinska Institute and the Swedish Network of Psychedelic Science. Today we are happy to have Wagner, researcher from Ryerson University, practicing therapist, and has been closely working with MAPS on MDMA-assisted therapy. And today she's going to be talking about her work with MAPS and on her own. Thanks a lot for coming. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us here this evening. And I'm always very grateful that I get to give these talks in English, and I appreciate how much of a privilege that is for me. So thank you for taking in all this information in English. So I want to recognize that. So today we're going to be talking about MDMA as a therapeutic catalyst. And specifically, I'm going to focus on using MDMA with couples and with cognitive behavioral treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'll provide an overview of what that's going to look like, and especially for those who maybe haven't, so who has not heard a lecture on MDMA before? Ooh, okay, great. So I'm going to share a little bit about MDMA itself, and then a little bit about what MDMA in psychotherapy looks like. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why what I'm working on and what my team is working on is different from what you may have read about in the news or heard in other lectures, if you've heard a lecture on MDMA. So we're going to show what's a little bit different about some of this work. So you'll see there's three different entities at the bottom here. I'm an adjunct professor in the psychology department there. It's also where I did my PhD, my postdoc, and my master's. So I've been there for a really long time now. And Remedy is my practice. So it's a center for mental health innovation that I created specifically with the intention of bringing together clinical work and research and to create a home for the psychedelic work to go forward in Toronto. It was where I live. And then MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, is the funder of the MDMA work that I've been involved in. So they are the ones who have done the fundraising and have given me the liberty and platform to go ahead and do some of this work. So the couples study I'm going to be talking about was a MAPS sponsored study. So they were involved in terms of helping us get the regulatory approvals for that. So to orient you a little bit more to what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about MDMA and its effects. And then we're going to talk a little bit about psychedelic psychotherapeutic mechanisms of action. That's a mouthful to say, psychedelic psychotherapeutic mechanisms. So what that means is, why do we think psychedelics are working in terms of doing good in therapy, and how do we think they're working? So I'm going to present a couple of different potential theories there. And then we're going to talk about MDMA in treatment specifically, so psychotherapeutic treatment. We're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and couples, both separately and together. And then what that looks like when you combine PTSD with couples work with MDMA. So I'm going to show you the outcomes of a pilot study that we ran. We're going to talk about the frame of couple therapy and why that's different and possibly important. And then we're going to talk about what I think might be the true demonstration of healing potential with MDMA going forward. So I'm actually going to invite us to do something a little bit experiential, if you feel like participating with me for a moment. So if you are feeling comfortable, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze. I'll invite you to find a comfortable position in your chair. And I invite you to take a deep breath in and let that deep breath go. One more breath in and let it go. Now I'd like you to turn your attention to yourself and to take in these words and bring them in for yourself. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free. and may I live a life with ease. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free. And may I live a life with ease. And now I'll ask you to bring someone you love to mind. And we're going to send these wishes to that person. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be free. And may you live a life with ease. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be free. And may you live a life with ease. And now I'll invite you to turn your attention to us all. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we be free. And may we live lives of ease. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we be free. And may we live lives with ease. One more deep breath in. And let that breath go. And I'll invite you to open your eyes and join us back. So when we do that, when we really purposely bring our attention to ourselves and to someone we love, and then to us all, to me that really embodies what I think about when I'm doing couples work with MDMA. And the idea that we have an opportunity to work with and heal ourselves. The other we get to send them wishes of goodwill, and then we get to work to collectively move forward and grow together. So now you get a little taste, and you can take that through with you as we go. Okay, MDMA, what is it? It is 3,4-methylene-dioxymethamphetamine. So it's a compound. Sometimes it is referred to as ecstasy. It is not just ecstasy. It is the active ingredient of once upon a time what was in ecstasy. So now, generally speaking, if someone's taking an ecstasy tablet, there's little to no MDMA in it. What we do see, though, is that sometimes there are recreational substances called Molly or called MDMA, which might have higher percentages of MDMA in it. But again, we don't know. So what we're going to be talking about here is the pure version of MDMA that's made specifically for these research studies. So you're getting the pure effect and not the effect of all the other things that recreational drugs are cut with usually. So MDMA is a monoamine releaser, and it has its largest effects on serotonin first most, then norepinephrine, then dopamine. It also has increases in serum oxytocin, vasopressin, cortisol, prolactin, DHA, ACTH. The oxytocin got a lot of attention initially because they're like, oh, that's why MDMA makes you bond. It's one of the reasons. It's not as huge a player as some of the other functions that happen with it, but it is something that people really, grabbed onto initially when they were looking at MDMA. So MDMA's psychological effects is it really promotes an acceptance of self and others and can promote a sense of empathy between yourself and somebody else. And that can be really key in terms of when we think about psychotherapeutic properties of it and why it could be really useful. And alongside of that, there's also a tolerance of emotionally upsetting materials. So really, you're able to sit with and address upsetting things as they come in. So MDMA doesn't get rid of your emotions. It doesn't get rid of what's negative and only feel positive. Rather, it creates the ability for you to sit with something that's negative and not turn away from it. And so oftentimes when we're using it in a therapeutic context, you'll have lots of people when they're in session kind of being a bit incredulous and going like, I really don't understand why this is called ecstasy. I do not feel ecstatic at all, which is accurate because they're experiencing all of their range of emotions, which perhaps maybe they haven't had access to before for a while. And this term, I need to find maybe a better way of saying this, but I use the words ease of cognition. And so functionally what that looks like is that oftentimes people will get to the end of a line of thought quickly. So they're not hemming and hawing, they're not feeling stuck about things. Rather, they're able to go, well, that's what I think about that thing. And so there's that kind of layer of judgment that goes away. And that can be very, very useful when you're thinking about it in a therapeutic modality. There's also a decentering or changed relationship to thoughts and memory. So you can have the experience of kind of stepping back from what's happened and not feeling quite so enmeshed with the material. And therefore, you can have a different view of something that's happened before. And if we're thinking in the context of a trauma, for example, being able to actually look at a traumatic memory and be able to remember it, when before, for example, you would have avoided that memory completely, and therefore not being able to see all the detail around it, and which potentially can make you stuck. So that decentering effect, or the ability of the changed relationship to the thought or memory, can be very powerful. And we're also seeing there's increased evidence now from different studies that there's an increased openness to experience. And so this is typically a personality trait that we consider to be fairly stable. It doesn't change over time. And in fact, tends to get worse with age. That's the one bit where it shifts a little bit. But when someone has used MDMA, and actually we're seeing now with psilocybin too, that there seems to be an increased openness to experience. So that personality trait actually can shift, which can be very useful. So generally speaking, when we're thinking about psychedelics and their mechanisms of action, there are a couple of different theories that are coming out about why they might be working. So these theories are actually psychedelics broadly, they're not just MDMA. And so I also want to clarify that psychedelics, I use psychedelic, which also includes MDMA. MDMA is not a classic psychedelic, so it's not a hallucinogen. So you're not necessarily having the type of external visual stimuli that you might with a classic psychedelic like psilocybin, LSD, DMT, and whatnot. But it does have non-ordinary state of consciousness producing properties, so therefore we talk about it as kind of a non-classic psychedelic. So one mechanism of action that we're taking a look at is a reduction in experiential avoidance. So what does it mean, experiential avoidance? It means this idea that we often spend our lives turning away from things that make us feel uncomfortable. And that makes a lot of sense. We don't want to sit with things that are hard. And in a lot of ways, that's actually very, very functional for us. If we're faced with a traumatic event, for example, let's say you encounter a bear in the forest, you're going to have a fight, flight, freeze reaction that happens. Your alarm system is going to go off in your body. It's really natural to either want to run away, to fight, or to freeze in that moment. And so anything then that reminds you of that situation, causes that experiential component to happen again, you're not going to want to participate in, because you're going to feel like, oh, I'm back with the bear in the forest. So initially that makes a lot of sense. But in the grander scheme of things, it's not helpful, because we end up teaching ourselves and learning our systems, our bodies, our minds, that that thing is not safe. And we do that in all kinds of ways when it comes to difficult things, hard emotions, and whatnot. So instead of experiencing them, we turn away from them. And so what psychedelics can do is potentially increase our ability to tolerate experiential avoidance, or experience and not avoid. Another potential mechanism is that we see a reduction in arousal, and this is specifically for MDMA. So we see a reduction in arousal, which might bring us into an optimal arousal window of tolerance. And so this is pulling from some ideas from Pat Ogden that Michael Mithoefer's talked about a fair bit, that it might bring us into this optimal zone so that we're able to sit with the different emotion that's happening. So we're not overly aroused, we're not under-aroused, we're just aroused enough to be able to tolerate some emotionally upsetting materials. There's also a new model that Robin Carhart-Harris's team has put up called REBUS, which is relaxed belief under psychedelics, and this is specifically when it comes to psilocybin. But this idea is that we all walk around with these schemas and these sets in our minds, and they're more or less stuck in terms of how we walk through the world. And what can happen under the influence of a psychedelic is it can relax some of those belief systems and allow for new information to come in and allow for new neural pathways to grow and new ways of thinking to emerge. So this is an idea that we're taking to. And there's another model as well called the ACE model that Roz Watts and team have been working on, which is related to acceptance and commitment therapy. And so this idea of accept, embody, and connect are these components that we think could be essential in terms of having a psychotherapeutic experience with a psychedelic that could be useful. So that's a bunch of theory to say that these are some ways we think it might be working with various psychedelics in practice. And so that's to set the stage up for what we've also been adding on to is what we think might be happening with couples in particular when they're using MDMA with treatment for PTSD. So let's turn our attention now to actually MDMA in PTSD treatment. So up until now, the vast majority of the work that's happened with MDMA and PTSD work has been with a type of therapy that's called either inner-directed or non-directive supportive psychotherapy, which means that there's not like a set number of things that the therapists are doing. There's not a set schedule of therapeutic intervention that's happening. There's a set model of what it looks like in terms of number of sessions and then MDMA session and then integration sessions afterwards. But what the actual therapy looks like is not standardized in between those. And so that's been very effective to date. We'll see a little bit of data about that in a moment. But that's one type of approach that can be used, combining it with MDMA for the treatment of PTSD. And this approach has received breakthrough therapy designation in the United States, which has meant that it's being seen as a potentially really useful tool and means that it's a little bit easier to have conversations and negotiation around doing more trials with MDMA, which is a great thing. And all the past studies and current multi-site study that's happening across North America and in Israel, there's 14 sites that are doing what we call a phase 3 study of MDMA for the treatment of PTSD, are really focused in a drug development model. So they're emphasizing taking the drug through so that it can be able to be prescribed in the future for the treatment of PTSD. And so that means the emphasis has really been placed on demonstrating the safety and efficacy and feasibility. And what we're doing, my team and I, are deviating a little bit from that, and we're going and focusing more on what happens when you change the variables around the psychotherapy. What does it look like when you're doing different things before and after the MDMA sessions, and what kind of impact can that have as well? So we're really thinking about expanding the use of MDMA in therapy. And a background of this is really that relationships are fundamental in our worlds, be they present or absent, supportive or stressful. And this isn't just romantic relationships. We are in relation constantly, all the time, with everybody around us. And how we move through the world in terms of those relationships can really dictate our quality of life and how we're coping and what's happening in our worlds. And so MDMA's empathogenic qualities, so that term empathogenic meaning to create empathy or to create a feeling of connection, can foster tolerance and acceptance of emotions, supports the ability to communicate, and supports feelings of connection. So really, it can potentially be a powerful tool to work with relationships. And so we're seeing this as a burgeoning area of interest, but one thing I really want to highlight is this is not new. There is a history of couples work with MDMA that dates back many decades. And so the interesting thing is that MDMA was used as an adjunct to psychotherapy until 1985, when it was made illegal. And by made illegal in North America and then everywhere else in the world following suit, it got placed into scheduling, and scheduling is a little bit different in each country, but put into a schedule where it is illegal for any use, including for prescription. That doesn't mean you can't do research with that substance, it just makes it really, really hard to do that research. But prior to 1985, when it wasn't scheduled, it was used for different types of psychotherapy. It was used for treating relationship distress, for PTSD, for anxiety. And there was a lot of early use in couples therapy. So this later publication by Shulgin and Shulgin, so this is Sasha Shulgin and Anne Shulgin. So Sasha was one of the chemists who reinvigorated the use and synthesis of MDMA, really. So, because MDMA was originally, well, it was originally synthesized, or they say it was originally synthesized in 1912 by Merck, and then put on the shelf, and it wasn't used because they couldn't find a use for it, because they weren't looking for a psychotropic drug at that point. But then other people started to resynthesize it, starting in the 50s and 60s, and then when Sasha got word of it in the 70s, he started producing it, and then he and his wife Anne had a model of creating and testing substances where they would then test them on themselves. And so they took the MDMA, and then they were like, well, we think this could be really good for couples therapy. And then they started doing couples therapy with it, and Anne in particular. So Anne is a lay therapist. So Anne still is alive today, and she lives in California, and she's in her late 80s. And I had the pleasure of hearing Anne speak this summer and getting a chance to talk to her a little bit about what she's been doing. And she was talking about the importance of the shadow in this work, and in particular with couples, how important that is. So the idea being that this idea is not new. It has a long history, but it had to stop or go underground starting in 1985. So there's also a rich history of therapists using this in underground contexts, but of course we don't have very much written about that because people have been doing it underground, and which means that they're not at liberty to talk about what they've been doing. All right, little history lesson there. So let's turn our attention to PTSD for a minute. And I always think this is really important to explain because the emphasis tends to be on the MDMA, but I started off as being a PTSD researcher. I knew nothing about psychedelics up until 5 years ago, like not a thing in the world. Had not taken a psychedelic, did not know anything about them, other than, I mean, I knew their names and generally speaking what they maybe did, but I was not a psychedelics researcher. And there was a really important piece of time. What happened was I was doing PTSD treatment development research at Ryerson with my mentor, Candace Monson, and we got approached, and Candace in particular got approached by MAPS to see if she'd be wanting to collaborate and do some of this work, maybe testing MDMA with a couples treatment for PTSD. And so I got called into her office one day, early on in my postdoc. I had been working with Candace for a few years, so used to all kinds of different conversations, but this was a really unique one. So I got called into her office, and it starts off with, so Anne, do you want to go to Charleston and take some MDMA? And I said, what are you talking about? And okay, so was the next answer to that question. And then because we'd been invited to participate in this study that existed for therapists, and specifically for therapists like me who knew nothing about MDMA, which was a really cool opportunity. And honestly was the thing that made me decide that this would be worth going forward with. So that experience was so important for me to have my own MDMA therapy session. And I'm so grateful for the foresight of MAPS to develop that, because then I can talk openly about my MDMA therapy experience. And so that can always be a challenge when most of these substances are not legal. So we went down to South Carolina, and then the protocol I followed was you get a placebo session and you get an MDMA session. So it was blind, I didn't know which one I got. And my first session, I thought I had a placebo for the first hour and a quarter. I was really sure. And then I noticed something start to shift. I noticed the music. I didn't start to not like the music. And I was like, oh, I really don't like this. What is this music? And then I started thinking, that's really odd, because I really like all music. And so I was thinking, that's funny. And I remember starting to have the thought of, well, if this is placebo, I don't want MDMA. And then I was like, oh, this isn't placebo, is it? And so, and then that started to shift. And then I, got to have the whole range of experiences and side effects and all the things that went along with it. But for me, what was the most seminal thing, and I'm lucky that I'm not living with PTSD, so I didn't have to, be contending with that in my therapy experience. But I ended up doing what felt like years of work in that one day for myself. And that was so important, and I value that so much. And afterwards, getting to think through, oh wow, how potentially powerful could this be for the folks that I've been working with who are living with the effects of PTSD and their loved ones. So what PTSD is is a collection of things that happen after a trauma has happened. It could be one trauma, it could be multiple traumas. So we don't differentiate in this work between PTSD and complex PTSD. It's all, we put it all together here. So it could be childhood experiences, adult experiences, it could be from sexual assault, from war, from an accident, from an assault, you name it. But something happens. That's an important starting point, something happens. And then a key piece is re-experiencing. So you would have thoughts, memories, experiences, body sensations that come back about the traumatic experiences. And they come back unbidden at any, sometimes they're triggered by things, sometimes it feels like they come out of the blue. So re-experiencing is a key component there. The next group of symptoms is called avoidance. So you remember me talking about experiential avoidance a little bit earlier. So avoidance is a really big hallmark of PTSD. And as many people as there are different ways to avoid. It can be really sneaky and really slippery. It could be very obvious things like people, places, situations, reminders. And it can be really subtle things too. It can be, I don't like that feeling. I don't like that physical sensation. I've noticed I don't want to work out anymore because my heart rate goes up and I don't know what that means and I feel anxious. But there might be some link there, like maybe my heart was racing at the time of the trauma and I'm trying to avoid that internal experience too. So there's all kinds of ways that avoidance can occur. The third group is negative thoughts and feelings. That's a broad term, but also within there is some numbing that happens. So when you get really, really overloaded, then the system will try to shut down and numbing occurs, as well as alterations in cognition and mood is what they call it. So it tends to be a persistent negative state that can have fluctuations, but it also is tied to really strong negative beliefs about the self or the world or other people. And that's the thing that we think of as getting stuck. And that's where sometimes we can see some movement. And especially when we're thinking about cognitive behavioral treatments for PTSD, oftentimes we're targeting those thoughts that somehow got stuck afterwards, as well as the avoidance that people are engaging in, whether they know it or not. That's part of our kind of investigatory work. We're like Sherlock Holmes, and they're trying to figure out how we're avoiding. And then the fourth group is changes in arousal and reactivity. And that's really highly linked to that fear response. Remember that bear, if you're in the woods, you get that fight, flight, freeze response happening. So you have hyperarousal and hypervigilance that go alongside of it, so being really watchful of what's happening, going on around you, and your body and your system is really, really activated. So all the, what we call somatic symptoms that go alongside of PTSD are captured in that group. So the types of treatments then for PTSD that exist, they all target some of these different areas. Some of them more explicitly than others. Some of them are going out multiple areas. Some of them, one more so. So exposure treatments are used, which are literally exposing you to memory or things that you might be avoiding. Cognitive treatments are used, so working with those thoughts that get stuck. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is a type of treatment called EMDR, and that's working on traumatic memory in particular. Somatic treatments exist. Some are symptom management, so helping you cope, and some are complementary, so help with some of the symptomatology that comes up around side of it. And all these different treatments can be delivered individually, in couples, or in groups, and some different ones in different ways. And the reason I highlight that is because right now, what we see is the treatments that have the most evidence so far in the literature are for exposure and for cognitive work. And the interesting thing is these are, generally speaking, not always the most widely practiced treatments. And there can be a lot of thought or misperception about what they can feel like to clients. And so I feel like a part of what I try to share is that there can be this misperception, particularly I predominantly practice the cognitive version, so cognitive processing therapy or the couples treatment, but that it follows a protocol. But the protocol is there to be basically a scaffold for someone to hang on to so they can go even deeper. And I find sometimes there's a misperception that cognitive behavioral treatments, they're too cookie cutter or they're too rigid in different ways, and people are not necessarily going to have the depth of experience that they might in other ways. And I really have seen that within the clinical treatment of PTSD, that is so useful, especially at the beginning, especially when you're talking about trauma. More can happen down the road, but that can be a really useful place to start, an anchor to hold on to. And what we see of mechanisms specific to healing trauma, the first is non-avoidance. So emotional, behavioral, experiential. So approaching things that you want to avoid. Secondly, it's meaning making. So creating some cognitive flexibility. The third is enhancing relationships. We're back to the couples part now. Is that what we've seen in some longitudinal studies is that over time, social relationships can impact what PTSD looks like. So at the beginning, with less negative social support, so less challenging interactions, there's less PTSD. But then over time, PTSD can actually erode social support. So that way that the existence of the PTSD can take away some of the support that was there previously. So therefore, what we need to work on is the fact that even though some of these, we have some treatments that do work for portions of people, so our best treatments work for about 50 to 60% of people. That's okay, but it's not good enough. We need even more. And we particularly need treatments for people for whom the other ones are not working. We also, I firmly believe in creating options and choice, that you should get to choose what treatment you want to do that feels best for you. And also, we need to know for whom, why, and when does something work. Because a lot of the time, we see that motivation is a huge component in terms of feeling just either at wit's end, going like, I'm going to do anything to make this stop, or I feel really ready to make this change. And also bringing in the system. So the idea of bringing in other people in that person's world to help in terms of the healing process and to heal for them too. And this idea too that can healing be even more profound? So could we see even fewer symptoms that we see right now when we see that people are improving from PTSD? Can we see improvements in other domains? So things like relationship happiness or the functioning of the partner, and also for other people. So when it comes to PTSD in couples then, we see that it's not just the individual who's impacted, it's everybody, and especially their loved ones who are surrounding them. And that treating the aftermath of trauma in the context of relationships has really strong potential power. And really you're approaching the healing of trauma as a whole system, so you're healing all components of it. So then the idea being that we started to think about this idea of testing a previously developed and tested treatment for PTSD for couples, and then adding MDMA to it. And so some of the benefit of doing that is we know that that treatment already works on its own for the treatment of PTSD, which is a great thing, because therefore you already have a benchmark of going like, we know that X many % of people do get better with this treatment. So if we add MDMA to it, could it be even more? Could we see even greater gains? So the treatment that we used is called Cognitive Behavioral Conjoint Therapy for PTSD, CBCT. I'm just going to use CBCT from here on out. And it was originally developed for two people to do it together. We call it dyadic treatment. The vast majority of people who've received it to date are romantic partners, but it doesn't need to be for romantic partners. We've tested it out in case studies with other close relationships. So it could be other family members, close friends, anybody for whom this impacts their relationship and their lives. And with different trials, we've shown that CBCT creates decreases in PTSD symptoms, increases in relationship satisfaction, and improved partner functioning in numerous trials. And so the interesting thing is increases in relationship satisfaction. That to me is always, it's an important measure, but also one that I want to highlight that not always in couples therapy is the best outcome, the fact that the couple stays together. Historically, when we looked at couples research, some of the outcomes are like negative outcome is divorce, positive outcome is stay together. I don't believe in that. I believe that the best health of the relationship is what's going to best serve the people in the relationship. And so sometimes that can mean a loving way of splitting. So what we look at though is when we're looking at relationship satisfaction, it has nothing to do actually with whether or not the couple is together. It has to do with how happy you are with whatever state your relationship is in. And it could be we're happily okay with moving in this direction, or we're happily okay together. So the item I'm going to show you is that we use for kind of a measure-by-measure symptom of it, assessment of it, has to do with overall how happy are you in the relationship. So then we also see that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD has shown decreases in PTSD symptoms, and some strong evidence for that so far. So we therefore combined CBCT with MDMA in a pilot trial, and the goal to potentially facilitate really deep healing in the context of relationships. So I'm going to turn now to actually what did it look like. So CBCT consists of 3 phases. It's usually delivered as a weekly psychotherapy for 15 sessions, or modules, if you will. And the first phase is emphasizing psychoeducation about PTSD, so developing a shared understanding between the 2 people about what is PTSD, what does it look like in their lives, and how is it affecting their relationship. And then we're also working on safety building. So that's really important, particularly when you're talking about working with traumatic content. You want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the idea that if things get heated, if we disagree, if we argue, that we're going to have tools to help it not escalate to a point where it doesn't feel safe anymore. So we're working on tools to work with irritability, anger, aggression. Then we move into phase 2, and we're specifically focusing here on relationship enhancement and reducing avoidance. So what that means is we're doing a lot of communication skills. Those are really fundamental in this treatment, and encouraging that approach of communicating about all kinds of things, be they positive, negative, difficult, not difficult. And also working on reducing avoidance through behaviorally approaching things that they're usually avoiding as individuals and as a couple or a dyad. And then the third phase is we're specifically moving into the cognitive piece. So we're working on meaning making around thoughts that may have gotten stuck about the traumatic experience. And so we go through various themes that are really key and we find come up the vast majority of the time in most people with PTSD, like trust, power, control, esteem, intimacy, acceptance, and blame. And so those are ones we check in on and then pull out and work on the pieces that are really specific for that dyad. So when it came to the study that we ran that combined CBCT with MDMA, we ran it with 6 dyads. But we decided to stop after 6 because our results were quite compelling and we wanted to save a little bit of money. So we stopped after 6, and mostly because this was a proof of concept. And both participants in this study receive MDMA. I highlight that because therefore that means we're actually giving someone MDMA who does not have a diagnosis of anything. So we're the first study that's actually done that legally, to give any type of psychedelic in a treatment to someone who doesn't have a disorder. So that has been, we initially thought we were going to have pushback around that, both from regulatory or from ethics, and we didn't at all. And I think that really speaks to the data on how much this impacts other people, and really that the coping with PTSD is so challenging for families and for systems. So both participants got the first sessions. They did 2 MDMA sessions. The first session, they got 75 milligrams of MDMA, and then an optional supplemental half dose of that, so half the amount again, and an hour and a half. Then the second session, they could opt to go up to 100. I believe everybody in our study did go up to 100 milligrams to start, and then an optional supplemental half dose on top of that. And then we had some primary and secondary outcomes. What the important thing is we're assessing for PTSD symptoms from the perspective of an independent rater, so someone who is a trained clinician, who knows how to do these measures, who is not one of the therapists, as well as the person with PTSD is reporting on their symptoms, as well as the partner is reporting on their perceived symptoms of the person with PTSD. And then they're also rating their relationship satisfaction. So the protocol flow looked like this. So the yellow, the stars, are the assessment time points. And so we had assessments at baseline, mid-treatment, 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. Our primary outcome measures were at 1 month after the last end of treatment. The prep, so we did 2 prep visits. So prep visits are basically giving information about the treatment and getting informed consent. Then we did in-person CBCT. So we did a big condensed day where we did several modules in that one day to give this kind of mass dose effect at the beginning. And then the next day we did a little bit of in-person CBCT in the morning as a primer, and then gave the MDMA. I'll talk a little bit more about what it actually looks like when we give MDMA in a moment. And so then the couple stayed overnight at the treatment facility, and then we did integration the next morning. And so integration meaning that we talked about the experience, what they'd taken out of the experience, and what they were maybe struggling with or not making sense of or wanting to keep in mind going forward. And then we sent them on their way, and then over the next 3 weeks, we did 4 CBCT sessions, so of the therapy. We happened to do it over telehealth because we were running this study in South Carolina, and I live in Toronto, so I was going back and forth. So we did some of them over video. And then they came back together for an in-person CBCT again, second MDMA session, integration, and then followed up with 4 more sessions of CBCT to finish out the protocol. So what does it actually look like doing an MDMA session? So I'm going to move us actually here first. So this is the therapy room that we used. And you'll see you've got 2 recliner chairs. And so this is where the couple is sitting. And so they're able to lie back or sit up as they like. And then I'm sitting in one of the therapist chairs when I took this photo. So we're sitting in front of them. But we also have these little camper chairs that we're able to pull up beside the reclining chairs to sit with the couple as they're in, if they want more support and closer support. And so what it looks like in those moments is that we're encouraging them to spend time what we call inside. So they've got eye shades on and headphones on, and they're listening to, we've got an acoustic music that's playing. And the music is actually there supporting the experience and helping them deepen the experience as well. So sometimes it's activating music, and sometimes later on it helps us a bit more, brings people back to a smoother state later. So they're spending time inside, so inside their own internal experience, and then at other times they're conversing either with us as the therapist or with each other. And so what we do in those moments is we've learned how to better coordinate conversation between the partners. Initially we weren't so great at that, and then we learned better how to kind of conduct between them, because we really want to maximize each person's experience. Because it tended to happen that initially when the partner with PTSD, for example, would sit up, take off their eye shades and go like wanting to share something, the partner immediately is like, ooh, and sitting up and like right there wanting to hear. And because oftentimes the partner with PTSD had not been sharing for a really long time, and specifically hadn't been sharing about the trauma. And what happened is that the vast majority of people, when they're in an MDMA study, will spontaneously start talking about their trauma. And so partly it's probably because they're primed that we're in a PTSD treatment, so kind of why we're here. But they're not actually explicitly asked to talk about the trauma itself. We're talking about the trauma, but we're not actually asking them to go into this happened, this happened, this happened. And every couple I sat with in these sessions, they just started recounting. They started talking and wanting to go through the memory and wanting to share that with others. And so what we would do, or we learned to do as we went forward, was letting each person have their experience and then holding information. So for example, one person would be like, oh, I thought of something I want to say. They could turn over and say to us, can you write this down? And we're like, great, jot it, and then you go back inside. And so when you're both ready to have a conversation, we'll be able to make sure that we're able to share that together. And we're really allowing in those moments for whatever cognitive, emotional, somatic material comes up. So there is no agenda in the MDMA session itself. We're supporting non-avoidance of whatever is happening, whatever's being embodied, and the experiential learning that's going to come from that. So it could be that someone's lying in the chair and then they're shaking, right? They've got a lot of pent-up energy and they're going through a memory and they're having a lot of somatic stuff that goes along with that. So sweating and shaking and crying, and we're there. We're there supporting that with them, and their partner's there too. And other times they might be having a feeling of ease, which they haven't had in a really long time, and getting to support and enjoy that, right? And letting them have that experience too. So what did we find? So we found, so I'm going to orient you to what this is on the left. So CAPS-5 is the clinician-administered measure. The PCL patient is the person themselves rating their own PTSD symptoms, and then the PCL partner is the partner rating the other person's symptoms. So you'll see here that the CAPS, they started with a mean of the whole group of the 6 people of 43. And this is the CAPS-5, so based on DSM-5 criteria, and we tend to see lower scores on the CAPS-5 than we historically have seen on other measures. So sometimes the spread doesn't look quite so impressive if we're comparing it to older studies. But then we saw a very significant drop to the mean at post-treatment to a 16. And the Cohen's d, so that's the effect size, which means how strong that effect is. Granted, all of this is grain of salt because this is only 6 couples. I'll say that many times, only 6 couples, but gives us enough evidence to say that we're very excited about what we've seen so far and that we're really excited about testing it even further and with more people. So a Cohen's d of greater than 0.8 is considered large. So the fact that we're 1.95, we're extremely large in the effect size on clinician rated. For the patient, they had a massive drop. So they're rating their symptoms at about 61 at the beginning of treatment, and then a mean of 20 at the end. And so that's a Cohen's d of 2.13. And the partner starting at 48, going down to an 18 at the end, and a Cohen's d of 1.51. And so you'll notice that there was a difference there between the partner rating and the patient rating at the beginning. That's actually something that we look at clinically, because usually that means that there's not necessarily a shared understanding of what the person's going through. And so we like to see those measures get closer and closer together over time, which we saw by the end is much closer there. And then, in terms of relationship satisfaction, so this is based on the one item. This is not the analysis on the full measure, but it's the one item that they do each session. And so when they're rating their PTSD symptoms, they also answer this one question. So the item is, on the scale below, please circle the number that best indicates the degree of happiness, all things considered, of your relationship in the past week. So 0 is extremely unhappy, 6 is perfect, and 3 is happy. I'm very suspicious when anyone answers 6 as perfect, because that's usually pretty inaccurate in some way. But the pre-treatment mean was a 2.5, so we're not at the happy mark. And then post-treatment, we're up at 3.83, so we're almost at very happy, so somewhere between happy and very happy. And the effect size for the person with PTSD was huge with 1.96, and high and big for the partner of 0.97. So I wanted to share with you also just a couple of quotes that we pulled from either some of the sessions, and then one is actually from an email that I got from a participant. So at one point, we asked one of the participants in the session, what do you think it would feel like if PTSD wasn't here? And the participant's answer was, well, PTSD isn't here right now. The idea that in that moment, he felt like PTSD wasn't present in his experience. And that was really powerful for me to hear, because that idea that in that moment, that it didn't feel like that was the present thing, and he was able to work through what was around it. This is from another participant. This person said, I feel like the weight is lifted. We started unraveling the strings that had been in knots one at a time, and then the whole knot came undone. I feel different, and it feels great. I never imagined there could be this much healing. And this is a different partner who said this part. Thank you for giving me my life back and helping us with our marriage. I just have overall inner peace. It's amazing. There's no price anyone can pay for that. And then I actually got this email I got this email when I landed in Stockholm last year when I was here. And I just thought it was really fitting, so I'll read it now that I'm in Stockholm again. So this was a year after we ended treatment with this person. So he was saying that after that, the memories of that last year just poured out. It was hard to see and disturbing, but there was no pain or fear associated with them. Totally different than when we first met a little over a year ago. Hard to believe it's been a year. My life is totally different now, and I wanted you to know how deeply grateful I am for what you guys are doing. No words or all the thank yous in the world could express my gratitude. I have my life back, and for the first time in my life, I look forward to a renewed future. I live my life now with hope where despair ruled before. That is a pretty huge realization for me. It's like a light has been shone into the darkness of my soul. Pretty cool. With 3 exclamation marks. That's brilliant. So where does that leave us with the study itself? Well, first of all, I mean, it feels like a little bit like, safety measures after hearing like, my life changed, but it's important. So safety, no serious adverse events, none. Acceptability, no dropout. No one stopped the treatment. Feasibility, we did it. And we did it with a condensed delivery and video session. So it was a kind of bizarre setup initially for that protocol, and most of it was because of logistical issues. So we managed to do it in condensed dosing of masked therapy, and then video sessions, and then 2 MDMA sessions, and then more video sessions. And everyone did it, and everyone, participated in all that. And what we found is that what you see with that data up there is that only one person didn't have a remission of their PTSD. And so someone actually pointed out, I gave this talk a couple days ago, and they're like, why is your standard deviation so big on the final point? And I was like, well, because one person still had PTSD. So their scores were quite high. So if we took that person out of the analyses, our scores would be are even bigger effect sizes. But of course, that's really important that one person still has PTSD. So, and when we look at this compared to other studies of CBCT without MDMA, which I think is important, so the CAPS ranges in all the different studies, all the controlled trials we have, from 1.09 to 1.82, and we're seeing a 1.95, so that's higher than what we've seen in the other studies. The PCL patient range, this one to me is the most remarkable. It usually ranges from 0.64 to 1.61, and here we found a 2.13. So people are really perceiving that they're feeling better. And then the partner range is from 0.49 to 2.18, and we're at 1.51 in the study, and so they're right in the middle there. And then compared to other MDMA studies, so there was recently a paper that was published earlier this year that pooled all of the phase 2 data. So that's all of the studies, 6 studies that had taken place up until now, and up until what we're considering this phase 3 larger rollout. And their overall effect size on the CAPS was a 0.8. So interestingly, the highest scores that we would have heard were a 2.8 effect size in one of and its ITT is an intention to treat model. So that's the conservative way of calculating the outcome of a clinical trial. And then the completer model, so people who finished the treatment, there was an effect size of 3.9, which is massive. But even grain of salt, intention to treat, the highest score we have is 2.8, but all the studies put together is 0.8 effect size. So what I take from that is I think that this potentially has, we need to test it with many more people, but this idea of putting together a treatment that's already established for PTSD that we know works for a good chunk of people may actually have really strong effect with the MDMA, because really it's not the MDMA that's doing the difference. The MDMA is a catalyst to a therapeutic process. I always want to really emphasize that. It's not the MDMA itself that's the golden ticket. It's the process that happens and is sometimes catalyzed by the MDMA that can be really, really useful. And so really when we're thinking of the frame of couple therapy in doing this, what we're working with is this idea that the structure is really helpful for couples. I talked before around that idea that sometimes CBT gets a bad rap, but the idea, especially for couples, to have a shared language and understanding of what you're doing, how to communicate, and some skills to help you out with that can be really useful, especially when you're talking about trauma and you're talking about psychedelic experiences. And so creating that safe, mutually understood framework with skills and tools to use, I think is really important pieces of this. Also the idea that we had no expectations for MDMA sessions, but we did have intention setting. So there's ideas of what we're working on, but we're not expecting particular things to happen. And that we're bringing through exercises that the MDMA session itself is not structured and non-directive. And we're kind of following this idea put forth by Stan Groff and Bill Richards that we're allowing for a healing process to emerge naturally from an innate place that the client can begin to learn to trust. Additionally, we're seeing that this cognitive flexibility seems to be important in terms of this model, and that experiences in the body were really common and need to be able to be worked with and sat with in those moments. And that we would integrate afterwards, so making sense of the experiences and taking them forward, using the skills and tools that they'd learned initially, and then they're able to apply them afterwards too. That we're really creating the scaffold to tether the experience to. So what do we think is happening? There's the learning experience of not avoiding. There's a template experience of sitting with emotions. You get that really salient learning experience. Potentially cognitive flexibility, reduced rigidity, reduced inhibition, so being able to share about things that feel scary or hard. We're also seeing anecdotally so far, but we'll be curious to look at the data here, some reduction in dissociation and reduction in numbing symptoms, which are notoriously the hardest things to shift when you're doing PTSD treatment. And so the idea that those things might be reducing, especially in the moments of the MDMA sessions, could be potentially really powerful. That we do some decentering away from the key components of kind of over-identifying with the traumatic memories, and some self-compassion in those moments too. And really that it's an evolving process, that it's not just that session and then you're better. It's that session and then you're working to get better, and it's unfolding over time. And so we really emphasize that, and that's really what we see as well. So we've been working with this idea of creating a model, our own model, to add on to these other ideas of mechanisms of working, but this model is more to do with the idea of the couples framework. Again, these are not new ideas. We just put them together and we're fleshing them out in a way. So the idea that we have actually two sets within it. And so that's kind of a play on the words that we often talk about set, setting, and context in the terms of psychedelic therapy. And so we're playing with that idea here, that the setting for a couple is extremely important, that being able to have adequate support, comfort, and the idea of trust within that session is so key for allowing for a couple to both go into that experience. That the experience itself needs to occur fully, so allowing the container of the therapeutic space and safety of the setting to allow for that, and have the experience be fully shared in its preparation, the experience of it, and the integration afterwards, so that all of it is in a dyadic or a couple frame. And that the template of the experience, of the openness of what's happening, that any insights or learnings that they're having from that experience can serve as a template to help them move forward. And so within that template, we see three different things. First being the structure, so that the structure is really helpful and useful for couples to be able to actually dive deeper. So to be able to, I often think of that idea of, it's in developmental stages for kids, where if they're like securely attached to their parent, they will touch base with their parent, and then they're going to go run away and explore. And then they're going to come back, make sure they're there, cool, going to run away and explore. And so the idea of having something to tether to is really important. And we think about that as being this idea of the structure of the couple therapy. It's like, okay, we've got this skill, we worked on it, we're going to go dive deep into this trauma memory. Oh, don't know what to do with it, coming back to the skill, going to talk about it, going to go back in. So the idea you have something that you can hang on to when you need to be able to dive even further down. So that's with the exploration. The exploration of truly exploring whatever comes up in those sessions, be it emotional, cognitive, somatic. And then finally, the trust is trusting in the process, and that whatever is arising can be worked through and is in the service of better knowing, growth, and expansion. And that may not be necessarily what you set out for at the beginning, but that trusting that it will, if you actually dive into it, that it will be useful and helpful for you. So to conclude with that piece, we have that this combination intervention may provide a really strong intensive treatment option for dyads. And so the next step is we have to test it with a larger sample, and we need to test it to a control group. So our control that we're looking at doing for a randomized control trial is CBCT with a placebo. And so they'd be getting the same amount of psychotherapy, but they wouldn't have the active ingredient of the drug. So I think that's a really important comparison to see the differences between those. And the idea that I think this could be a true demonstration of the healing potential of MDMA. So with combining these two approaches, you're illuminating the possibilities moving forward of both dyadic frameworks or couples work in this area of psychedelics, but also of protocol-based interventions with MDMA and potentially with other substances too. And I think that's important that we think about. What variables do we need to shift or change to see the best possible outcomes for people? That we're able to demonstrate these changes and these effects with clinical and non-clinical participants. So we're seeing shifts and changes for the person with PTSD and their partner as well. And the impact of the relationships affects everyone. that this could be potentially a doorway to broader use of MDMA and psychedelics in the realm of growth and healing beyond psychiatric diagnosis, because we're starting to build the evidence base that it is safe and effective and useful for distress, for example, in relationships and functioning, and doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the idea of someone having a psychiatric diagnosis. So that's me. This is our team: Candace Monson, Michael Mithoefer, Annie Mithoefer, and the MAPS team. They're our team for the CBCT study. And I want to thank you, and I think we have time for questions now. Yeah? Okay.
Thank you, Anne, for a wonderful presentation. Very inspiring. Feels like this is a way to get more compassionate love into psychiatry and
Hopefully.
society as a whole. Yeah, we got 2 mic runners here. 2 microphones. We'll try to be fair and make sure get the right order here. So just raise your hand and we'll try to direct the microphones to the next one. This one there.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wagner, for a very interesting talk. I only glanced at this topic when I worked with PTSD, and it's very close to my heart to find more interventions that can help, especially people with chronic problems not able to get appropriate help. So I just have some questions about how persistent these changes seem to be, because I understood that in your was it a feasibility or a pilot study with the 6 dyads?
Yes, exactly, pilot.
You had the data from the follow-up, but is that after treatment, or is that the follow-up at 3 and 6 months as well?
Yes, so great question. So I'm going to repeat the questions, for everyone to hear, but also for the recording. So the question is whether or not the changes are persisting over time. And with the data, if I presented, was it immediately or was it through the long-term follow-up? So I'll bring up that slide again. Here we go. So this we presented here, it was just a post-treatment. So that's the 1 month afterwards. So we are in the midst of actually submitting the results for publication right now, but I can confirm that they were maintained and in some cases actually continued to improve at 6-month follow-up. Yeah, so therefore, yes, they persist over time to 6 months. We didn't measure after 6 months, but to 6 months, yes.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is that right? Or do you want to switch it up?
Let's keep going here, right here.
I was just curious about the reason why you would stop the try after 6 dyads when you were supposed to have 10. It doesn't seem like that big of a difference if you have very compelling results. Why not do the last 4 as well?
Yes, so the question was, why did we stop after 6 when we were planning to do 10? It is very expensive running an MDMA trial, so that was a big reason for it. And also the idea that with a pilot or feasibility study, at that point, we weren't going to be gaining additional power in terms of our analyses to demonstrate anything further if we'd added more couples in. So we opted to stop at 6, and then we've now focused our attention on going to the larger study. So that way we'd actually be able to demonstrate it with a full sample, and we're aiming for 40 couples for the larger study. Yeah.
Would that be sufficient for power?
Yes, hopefully it will be for at least demonstrating the primary outcome. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, it's on. So I'm curious as to the reason why you're using couples treatments back here.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
My understanding with like more traditional PTSD treatment is that it's individual treatment. But you're using couples and you're using couples conjoint with MDMA.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious the reason why you're using couples and not just traditional individual treatment.
Okay, so the question is why we're using couples as opposed to individual treatment for PTSD. So one of the main reasons why we're interested in doing the couples work is because of this idea that PTSD impacts not just the person, but also the whole system and the family as well. So when we're doing couples treatment, we're seeing equivalent, if not higher outcomes, or stronger outcomes, I should say, for the person with PTSD, so their symptoms improve, and you're seeing outcomes for their family member as well as for the relationship. So really, it's like 3 birds, 1 stone, if you will. So the idea of that happening, but also what's really important is sometimes when people do have massive change, so for example, if people have PTSD and are getting better, and their family isn't along for the ride in that they're not part of that change process, that can actually create massive rifts in the family system as well. So the idea of including a partner alongside can be really helpful in terms of helping those gains maintain, helping them generalize out into the rest of life as well. And also, to be honest, to offer another treatment option, because sometimes people are not wanting to do the individual treatment, and their partner being like, I'll do it with you, I'll be here, is really helpful. And so sometimes we'll be seeing the partner's actually the one calling in, wanting treatment, and then the other person with PTSD will come along.
Yeah, I was just wondering, since you mentioned in the earlier that PTSD could erode social support, so you would have an entire cohort of patients who are without social support. So I'm saying, are you thinking of doing this treatment on an individual basis for people who simply don't have a partner available?
Yes, so the question being that I showed some evidence that PTSD can erode social support. So it doesn't erode social support for everyone. It can, but yes, I think the vast majority of treatments are individual, and so all of the phase 3 studies that are being done are for individual treatment of PTSD. I also have another pilot study I didn't talk about today that's combining cognitive processing therapy, which is an individual treatment, with MDMA. So we're also testing individual evidence-based treatments for PTSD with MDMA too. Yeah. Because exactly, not everyone has someone they can come to treatment with. Yeah.
Okay, can I go in? Okay, you mentioned that you were looking to use it like outside of like people with mental illnesses, but are you starting to use it within like people with PTSD and with other mental illnesses, such as people with PTSD and clinical depression, or with anxiety, or like bipolar disorder as such?
Yeah, so the question being, I mentioned that it could potentially be used in the future in contexts that are not with PTSD or not with psychiatric diagnosis, but then the question was, what about with other diagnoses?
Well, people with both PTSD and other ones.
Yes, so the vast majority of people who have PTSD have comorbid diagnoses as well. So 60–70% of people at least have depression alongside their PTSD. So we actually have outcome measures that we don't exclude anyone who has comorbid conditions. The only thing we excluded for was active mania, active psychosis, and active substance use with dependence. So it was more things that would interact with the MDMA that we were excluding. So yeah, so very much we're going to be publishing outcomes on what happens to the depression, what happens to the anxiety as well. Spoiler alert, they all go down too. And also there are other teams that have either been looking at or are going to look at other indications altogether, so not using PTSD as the main target. So Alicia Danforth and Charlie Grobe, they looked at using MDMA for the treatment of social anxiety in autistic adults. And then there's an ongoing study right now in Bristol where they're looking at the use of MDMA for the treatment of substance use disorder, or alcohol use disorder in particular. Yeah, so there's different things. Thanks.
Yeah, I have a question as well.
Oh, hello. Okay.
It was a bit like a question, but I was wondering, like, is it like the thoughts coming through, or is it unconsciously? Because how do you find it?
So let me make sure I understand. How are we measuring the PTSD?
Yeah.
Okay. So how we measure the PTSD, or how we talk about its presence, is those different symptom clusters that we talked about at the beginning. So re-experiencing, avoidance, negative cognition and mood, and then arousal, so hyperarousal, hypervigilance. Those are assessed by clinical interview. So they're done by, usually it's a PhD level psychologist who's doing a clinical interview and who's talking with that person to see if those things are present in their life and to what extent and how much distress they're causing for that person.
Okay, so can you not use this as like anxiety and depression as well? just PTSD? Why minimize PTSD?
Okay, so the question being, why not also anxiety and depression?
Because it's kind of the same symptoms.
With the same symptoms, right. So there are some symptoms of PTSD that overlap with the symptoms of other anxiety disorders and depression, absolutely. But there's also some that are distinct from the various anxieties and depression disorders. Which are they? So that's actually a really big question, because there's lots of different anxiety disorders and lots in depression. So the idea being that we're using PTSD as what we would say is the presenting concern. So the thing that is most active for that person and causing them the most distress. Doesn't mean those other things aren't there too, and that we wouldn't also be tackling those. But the idea that PTSD is particularly difficult for them, and then the reason that we're focusing on PTSD first is because of what happens in the brain with PTSD is actually perfectly matched to the action of MDMA. And so in the prefrontal cortex, so if you have PTSD, generally speaking, your prefrontal cortex is quieter, and so that's the area of your brain that is impacting your decision-making, cognitive processing, all these various pieces, and your amygdala, so the area of your brain that is responsible for this fight, flight, freeze response, is active, overactive. And so what happens with MDMA is the amygdala gets quiet and the prefrontal cortex comes further online. So therefore, it's, if we were to design a drug or a medicine that was a good treatment or good catalyst for treatment for PTSD, it would be it. So that's why we've started with that.
Have you seen some kind of other studies showing the same result with like psilocybin or LSD?
So as of yet, there have not been any clinical trials for PTSD with psilocybin or LSD. There will be a psilocybin for PTSD study happening at Johns Hopkins. So that'll be the first clinical trial looking at that.
One on this side. Yeah.
Okay. So from the way you told us about the session, how the person would try to re-experience or tell about the event, I assume that you're talking about single PTSD, not a complex PTSD.
No, so the question asked, so when I describe someone talking about sharing about traumatic experiences in the session, the question is, was it therefore they're sharing about a single trauma and not a complex trauma? So no, not necessarily. So sometimes it was just one salient memory from, for example, a whole childhood that had been abusive. That actually happened a lot, where someone, for example, would be like, oh, I'm remembering this time, and then half an hour later, they're like, and now I'm remembering this time, and I'm oftentimes it felt like I'm filling in the gaps of things that I'd either purposely not been thinking about or I'd forgotten about, I'm remembering more detail around that. And actually, what I find really fascinating about that, generally speaking, is especially within this, what we sometimes would call complex PTSD, or this long trajectory of traumatic experiences that impacts personality formation and all these different things, is that oftentimes people have not able, for various reasons, to look back with nuance around what has happened. And that can be so powerful to be able to do that in various instances, because then they're able to see how that's impacted, how they've developed thoughts about themselves and the world and other people going forward. So yeah, they may have flashes of memory that are instances, but within a trajectory of experience.
So you never screen for complex PTSD attachment styles or anything like that?
No, we don't screen out for complex PTSD or attachment styles, mostly because it's so common. I think would do us a real disservice in terms of actually creating a really effective treatment if we were to differentiate between those. And so we see a mix, but the vast majority of people who have chronic PTSD are not a single incident event. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. How did you recruit participants?
Yes. So we recruited participants through a variety of different means. So it was Information was sent out to clinicians in the area, as well as there was information that was sent out through the MAPS listserv. There was information posted online. There was, we told our colleagues as well. So it was kind of every means possible. Yeah, that's how we recruited.
Because have everybody received treatment before?
Yes, in this population, we didn't actually explicitly say you needed to have received treatment before, but every person had had multiple treatments, including multiple pharmacological treatments, as well as psychotherapeutic interventions. Yeah. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you have some experience or information or knowledge about adding MDMA to the work with children, therapy with children? For instance, with severe PTSD, there's also couples, it's always one of the parents or
Yeah, great question. So the question is, do I have any knowledge or experience of any work with children or adolescents with MDMA for treatment of PTSD? So not yet. So there hasn't been any work done in trials. What's going to happen, though, is once these phase 3 trials are done in North America and in Israel, then what will happen is once the approval goes through, which we don't know how long that will take, but within hopefully a couple of years, then they'll have to do what they call phase 4 trials, which is testing it in different populations. And one of those groups is going to be adolescents. And then if that shows that it's effective and feasible and safe, then it would also go down to children. So we'll have some data at some point, but it'll be a little while. Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering, were the people cured from PTSD, like completely cured after participating in one session? Or like this process? Did you say that the PTSD was gone forever? Was it still?
Yeah. So the question is, was the PTSD cured in some of these folks? So cure is a difficult word to say because we're always all on a trajectory of different functioning in terms of our mental health. However, what I can say is several of the participants actually had scores of 0 on their measures at the end of the PTSD measure, which, to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen before clinically. So that was exciting. But then also what we see, like the technical term of cure is that you don't have threshold PTSD anymore. So you don't, meet a certain criteria on these measures. And 5 of 6 people didn't meet that anymore. I'm always cautious around that because you can absolutely have still some vestiges, some remnants of it if you're not meeting criteria. But the depth of healing that we saw for a number of people with scores of 0 and reporting I'm able to sit with the memory and it comes back and it's upsetting, but it doesn't keep me stuck. I'm able to move through it in a different way from a number of the participants is very exciting and speaks to me to the idea that there is no more PTSD.
And this was only after one process?
So that would have been that treatment block, right? So they had the equivalent of the full CBCT and the 2 MDMA sessions. Yeah. So all together, they were in treatment for 7 weeks with it.
Really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm right here.
Hi.
What are the risks or negative side effects with using MDMA?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, what are the risks or negative side effects? So there are not a lot of risks or negative side effects. There are side effects immediately after the session. They're usually quite manageable. So they can be things like headache, sometimes a little bit of nausea, sometimes a bit of increased anxiety afterwards or a little bit of low mood. There can be some physiological things like what's called nystagmus, so your eyes can be moving, and there can be clenched jaw, tightness in the jaw. All of those are quite transient. They usually resolve within 3 to 4 days afterwards. Occasionally, we'll see a bit more anxious reaction up to about a week later. But we did not see any serious negative outcomes in terms of adverse side effects beyond that in our study.
And is that because you're administering it in small doses, or would it be different if you used it a lot uncontrolled?
Oh yes, so if you use it in an uncontrolled way, I cannot guarantee that there would not be many more side effects than that. So, I mean, we're using pure MDMA in a very controlled setting, meaning that we are controlling how much water they're getting, that they're getting water, that they're, you know, the temperature control, that, you know, they're getting electrolytes and they get a snack later. You know, it's like we're controlling all the variables to make sure their physical comfort is taken care of and there's not overstimuli from anything else. And I mean, I can't emphasize enough that pure MDMA is different than things that people might be taking that they think are MDMA. So yeah, the idea and the fact that we're screening people for underlying physiological conditions that may make it not as safe to take MDMA. And so some of the things, for example, that we rule out are hypertension is one, and any cardiac issues that are there, as well as some other, for example, issues that affect the like glaucoma or the liver. So things that we don't yet have good information to say that it is safe with those conditions. So we're cautious around that.
And my final question then, was that why it was made illegal, because of those side effects, or why was that, since it was used and then went illegal?
Yeah, to be honest, the reason it became illegal was political, and the safety data at the time didn't support its being put into Schedule 1, which is in North America was meaning that it's illegal. So, and in fact, when there was a hearing that was done about it in the mid-'80s, the DEA, so the Drug Enforcement Agency in the US, they had a panel and they had a judge ruling on it, and their judge actually allowed that it should not be a Schedule 1 drug, but the DEA overruled that, and that was due to political pressures as opposed to the actual science at the time. So there has been data over time, for example, talking about neurotoxicity and whatnot. A lot of it has been debunked going forward because of the designs that have happened with it, or it was tested on animal models that were not equivalent to human consumption. Also, some of the times when you're seeing some data on neurotoxicity, you're actually seeing it based on polydrug users. So we can't parse out what is MDMA versus other substances at the same time. So that's actually the riskier thing, is all the different things together in all kinds of different conditions, as opposed to the careful screened use in a psychotherapeutic context. Yeah, also, we don't send people home with their MDMA, right? Like, it's in office, we're giving it to them, we control like the temperature it's kept in and a locked safe and all that stuff. So it's also the idea that it's not an ongoing use. They're getting max 2 doses in our study, right? And that's it. So it's not going to be something they're going to receive on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm.
We have time for 2 more questions. There's one up there, and I think one there too. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so my question was regarding, you said that you grouped together different types of, in terms of severity, the PTSD. So in your future studies, when you want to compare to like placebo, you kind of group them according to that severity to kind of normalize for other factors.
So the question, if I understand correctly, was that you believe that we group together different severities of PTSD, and if that's possible to do that, how can we actually parse out the results of that? Gotcha. Okay, so I should clarify that everyone in the study had to meet a threshold of severity of PTSD. So you had to meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD, and you needed to have PTSD for over 6 months. And it didn't matter what the source of your PTSD was. So it could have been single incident. It happened that none of ours were. They were all either multiple incidents or childhood traumatic experiences. We had a veteran, war veteran, who was in there too, so he had multiple exposures to various things as well as childhood abuse. So like people had very complex trauma presentations. So we really aren't actually looking at a range in terms of severity. They were all severe in terms of PTSD. And so in the future, in the study that the CPT study we're planning and the randomized control trial that we'll be doing, the idea is the same. They have to meet a criteria cutoff in terms of diagnostically. They need to have met criteria for PTSD, as well as they need to meet a symptom level that goes alongside of it that indicates that it is full-blown PTSD. And it won't matter what the genesis of the PTSD is. Thanks. Thank you.
There's one in the middle, too, I think.
Hi, thanks for the talk and for all the work that you're doing. My question is, in the follow-up that you've done, I suppose that this is actually pretty hard to measure or to have metrics for it. But I would like to know if you have any data concerning the openness to experience, as you put it, the cognitive flexibility that increases after taking MDMA, if it continues after the sessions and if it enhances in some way the process of healing.
So the question was, did we measure, do we have outcomes to do with the openness to experience, and does it continue or stay over time, and how does that impact the healing process? So in this study, we didn't actually use the measure of openness to experience, unfortunately. Next one, we're totally going to do that because I really want to know that data. But what we do is they give some more qualitative answers when they're filling out the questionnaires, and also when we're meeting with them and we have the transcripts from their session. So we're going to be doing some qualitative coding to see what they're expressing in terms of those experiences for their follow-ups. But then in the studies that have measured the actual openness to experience, they were seeing that at follow-up, and so at long-term follow-up. And some of that follow-up was up to, I think it was actually 3.5 years later. And so they're seeing, I don't know if they had measures to show whether it increased or changed, but it was present at that time. So, yeah, thanks. Okay, so I think that's it. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and attention. Thanks.
Just a few short announcements from the Swedish Network for Psychedelic Science, or Nätverket, psychedelisk vetenskap. There's a film screening after this. I think some of you may have tickets for it. Triple Compassion. Tickets are sold out, unfortunately.
There are some people selling online.
Sorry?
There are still some tickets selling online of people not showing up.
Okay, there may be some tickets, but
I just checked and like 2 seconds ago, and it's sold out. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's all sold out. Sorry. Yeah, and it's at Behavioral 58 for those who are going. Yeah, and also please become a member of Nätverket psychedelisk vetenskap. We have 50% membership discount at the moment. Psychedeliskvetenskap.org/medlem. That's it. Thanks.